worship.
Exactly, and we have, let's see here, I'm going through the list here. One thing that's also interesting, of course, is that I know that you mention and you go into this, because this is a huge list, of course, of coincidences between that compares the JFK assassination with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and I doubt that we can get to them all with the time we have left here, but and this is a huge list of people, of course, can if they read your entire article, they can see all of these, the entire list of these coincidences. But tell us about some of the some that stands out to you when you read it, and some of the more impressive ones, or the juicy stuff, as it were.
Yeah, the ones that really struck me were the ones that were related to the family and also to the career, the political careers of the two men. For example, both Mary Todd Lincoln and Jackie Bouvier Kennedy were previously engaged to other men. They were married, both of them, at age 24 at the time of the marriages, and to the future presidents, Lincoln and Kennedy. And their husbands were both in their 30s. Both women were from socially prominent families, and they were both well known for their exquisite taste and fashion sense. Now, the interesting thing is that you start getting into these parallel dates when things would occur, and when I started this list, I wanted to go like past the usual 10 or 15 things that they usually mention, and I really wanted to see how ridiculous I could take this, to what extreme could this go. And I actually compiled over 100 different examples of things that are just, they're not coincidence. They can't be. When you start having, a coincidence, it's one or two things only. It's not 100 different things. And so both men were elected to Congress exactly 100 years apart, 1846 and 1946. Both men were the runner-up for the vice president nomination in 1856 and 1956, exactly 10 years later. Both men were elected presidents of the United States exactly 4 years after that, in 1860 and 1960. Both had less than 50% of the vote. The two presidential elections were held on November 8th, and the legality of each election was contested by the opponents of both Lincoln and Kennedy at the time of their election. Immediately after they got into office, they had to start thinking and working on issues related to war, and this had been a very prominent part of both administrations. The other interesting thing about this is that both presidents had a doctor named Charles Taft.
Really?
Both of these presidents had a personal friend and a person they considered an advisor named William Graham. And in JFK's case, that individual is known as Billy Graham. Both of these individuals were friends with a man from Illinois who was a Democratic politician, Adlai Stevenson. Going back into the 1800s, there is an Adlai Stevenson that's hanging out with Lincoln. Both of these individuals were related to senators and other famous politicians, and also were related to an attorney general who had graduated from Harvard University. What I also found was interesting was that when a few days before Lincoln was actually murdered, he had a very interesting premonition about his murder. And so the police were involved, and they were warned of this assassination plot to kill Lincoln. This individual, this police investigator, was named John Kennedy, Henrik.
Oh, man.
JFK had a personal secretary by the name of Evelyn Lincoln.
Yeah.
And her husband, Harold, his nickname was Abe.
Oh, okay.
And so on it goes.
Yeah, on it goes, definitely. I mean, okay, so, I mean, what's going on there? I mean, either this is the evidence for, meticulous planning from someone or a gang of people surrounding, important people higher up, or is this evidence of the way the universe bends and twists to to everybody that surrounds this at this time, who's able to look at this, to kind of point to this as a kind of evidence that that there is a higher form of communication here, coincidence, synchronicity. What do you think is going on there? I mean, could someone plan all these things? Is that even possible?
Well, interestingly enough, since I published this paper last Friday, this has been the aspect of the report that most people have written to me to comment on. And what they've said in their emails to me is that this is, just not possible that they could plan this much in this level of detail. But as we will discuss in the next segment, when I talk about my family and their connections to the Illuminati, I will tell you about planning that is so meticulous and so thought out beforehand that, to me personally, this is an expression of planning more than it is coincidence or synchronicity. Because again, when you start to get into 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 different examples of this, I think with each successive example, it becomes less and less probable that it is mere coincidence.
Coincidence, yeah. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, definitely looking forward to speaking more about that. Before we begin to round things up here, one thing we must, talk about, of course, is the double aspect to all of this. You have a photograph, a very interesting photograph on in your article that talks about this, and this guy was called Jefferson Davis Tippit, and a possible double. There's a whole story here. Tell us a little bit about that before we round things up here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting part of the story. Absolutely. Jefferson Davis Tippit was a police officer with the Dallas Police Department in the Oak Ridge section of Dallas. And we are led to believe by the official fiction that Lee Harvey Oswald ran off into the neighborhood and was distraught that he just killed the president and was trying to get away and so on and so forth, and he just killed this guy who happens to look an awful lot like John F. Kennedy. Now, the coincidence about this is that this man looked so much like John Kennedy that his nickname was JFK. And they used to call him Jack Tippit. Going back to Hiram Abiff again, Tippit was also shot in the same three places as Abiff and JFK. So once again, we have this improbable coincidence scenario going on.
Yeah.
And when we start looking at the autopsy photos, and I direct people to a very interesting report by Robert D. Morningstar, which is linked in the sources section at the bottom of the article. Morningstar talks about very intimate and very tiny details of the autopsy photos and points out things that are inconsistent with this being JFK. And by the time you get through this mid-size report, I doubt anybody could come to the conclusion that that person in those autopsy photos is anybody but Tippit. So it gave them the excuse of using a body double in terms which may have been for the very first time, for all I know. I don't have access to that information, but it just allowed them to manipulate the autopsy, the body, and everything to support the official fiction of the event and to steer investigators and researchers such as myself into an opposite direction when in fact we have the answers staring at us right in the face.
Isn't that interesting?